All right. Hey, everybody. My name is Nathan Smith, and I'm the Digital Programming Coordinator here at the Central Arkansas Library System. Thanks so much for joining me for Microsoft Excel Part 3, Color Coding, Logic, and more. I'm looking forward to showing you some really cool stuff in Excel. We're getting into the some of the really exciting bits, some of the stuff that's just really incredibly useful. So I'm excited to show you this, and I'm glad you're here. Before we get rolling, a few little preliminary things to tackle. First of all, of course, we always have tons of interesting virtual events coming up here at CALS, and so you can check that out if you head to cals.org, move your mouse over events, and click on find an event online. Then you'll see a big old list, and you'll also see a technology classes selection in that same menu, so you can you can see what technology classes are coming up. Let's see. So the other big thing that I always like to say at the beginning of class is I always want to make sure that folks are encouraged to ask questions. So the point of a technology class is not for me to go through a whole outline and make sure I hit every point and talk about every possible facet I could of the subject, although it's nice to talk about lots of facets of a subject. The point of a technology class is for you to learn useful things about technology. I know, shocker, right? So if you're learning useful things about technology, even if they're not all of the things that I planned to cover, that's a successful class. What's a less successful class usually is if I'm hitting all the points in my outline, but you're not understanding what I'm saying, and it's kind of going in one ear and out the other, and it's not going to end up ultimately being all that useful to you when you go to use Excel in your daily life. So to that end, if you have questions, just speak up and let me know. Don't worry about if it seems like a silly question. I'm not going to be concerned about that at all. Certainly, don't worry about if it seems a little off topic or something like that. I mean, if you're going to ask me questions about, I don't know, cleaning your garage or baking or something like that, then we're too off topic. But if it's a question about Excel, even if it's not something we're necessarily talking about right that moment, then that's definitely worthwhile. And I encourage you to ask it. So ask questions when you have them. That way we can make sure that that those get addressed and that you're not distracted by just little lingering questions in the back of your mind that might cause you to be distracted from what's going on in the class, because that way we can make the most of our time, and you'll walk away from the class having really learned a lot of useful things. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive in. Let me go ahead and do one more thing here, which is in the chat and comments. Oh yeah, so if you have questions, how do you do this? So if you have questions and you're joining me here in Zoom and you're on a computer, what you'll want to do is look down at the bottom of your Zoom window, click on the little speech bubble that says chat, and type your question in the chat box so that I can see it. Type it in, press enter, or return if you're on a Mac, and I should see that pretty much right away. If you are joining me in Zoom, but you're on a mobile device, tap the middle of the screen, look in the corner for a little button that says more, and then tap on that, tap chat in the menu that pops up, and type it in there, and you should be able to send me your question that way. If you are joining me via live stream, if you're on Facebook, just use the comments like you would any other place in all of Facebook. Drop your question in the comments and I'll be able to see it and respond to it. And then if you're joining me on YouTube, what you'll want to do is use the live chat out to the side or down below, I think, if you're on a mobile device. And obviously, also let me know if there are technical issues at any point. If my screen freezes up, if you lose my video and I haven't said like, I'm going to turn my camera off for a sec, or things like that, please let me know if my sound goes out. Certainly, please let me know so that way we can make sure that that gets tackled. There have been situations in the past where something wasn't working properly and we lost a lot of class time just because I was teaching away and didn't know there was a technical problem, and folks folks weren't getting any of the information that I was trying to give them. So please let me know if there are technical problems so I can get those resolved. All right, let's do this. So here in the chat and comments and so forth, I'm going to go ahead and drop the link for the example file. If you are if you want to follow along live as we go through the material today, then I definitely encourage you to do so. It's good to get some hands-on practice in addition to seeing something done. And if you go to that link, you can download the example file, and you can also download a handout, which is a nice cheat sheet you can go back to later on. You know, if you're like, I swear he said something about that in part 3 and I can't remember what it was, it's in the handout for sure. So if you follow that link, it's cals.link/excel-3-files, then that will get you to the example file in the handout. If you don't feel like following along or you'd prefer to just watch this time, that's perfectly fine too. Feel free. It's you know, it just depends on how you learn best, and you can always go back, download that later, and you can even watch the recorded version of the class after the fact as well at the CALS YouTube channel. Easy way to get to that is head to cals.link/YouTube. Pretty easy. Okay, so here we go. I am going to fire up the screen sharing and we'll get into it. All right, oops, there we go. Playing around with it a little bit before class. Okay, so here we go. This is the example file that we'll be working with today. It's well, my version of it is called part3.xlsx. Yours may have a different name because the service where I'm hosting these files kind of changes the names for some weird reason. So if it does have a different name, don't worry about it. It's still the same file. You should end up with something like this when you first open it up. Now, of course, we'll need to come up here to the top and click on Enable Editing to make sure that Excel will actually let us make changes to the file, and that moved my Excel window for some reason. Bizarre. There we go. Now we're back. So yeah, I promise I didn't put any viruses, not even a little one, in the file there. Okay, cool. So we've got part 3. We're going to do, let me give you a little overview of class today. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about a number of different topics that are really useful, not advanced, but intermediate topics, I would say, for Excel. Of course, if you've been here for parts 1 and 2, or if you've watched the YouTube videos before today's class, then you already know everything you need to know in order to tackle the material today. And you know, you're an intermediate user of Excel at this point. So so you're going to do great. Don't worry that I said we're in intermediate territory. So here's what we're going to be covering today. We're going to talk about how to use what are called logical functions, particularly the if function in our formulas. And we'll talk about what that means in a minute, but basically it's a way to add some additional flexibility to your formulas that's really, really handy. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to talk about kind of protecting parts of your workbook, and also making sure your data is accurate. So data validation, we're going to talk about how to get rid of duplicate entries, and we're going to talk about how to protect parts of your workbook from either accidental changes or malicious changes, particularly if it's a shared file that you're working with. And finally, we're going to talk about conditional formatting, which is a way to do things like color coding that will help your data be more instantly readable and possibly look a little bit nicer too. That's always cool. So that's what we're going to be tackling today. Okay, let's do the thing. So here we are. If for some reason when you opened up the file, it wasn't on this logical sheet down at the bottom, go ahead and click on that to make sure you're there. We're not going to do, I do have kind of a terms refresher like we did at the beginning of last week in the handout. We're not going to do that during class really at this point, but if you're like, wait, what does that mean again? Please let me know, in the chat or comments, and I'll make sure that that we tackle that, because I do want everybody to be able to follow along. So if you're like, wait, what was that again? Then that's totally fine. Please make sure that you ask those questions when you have them. Okay, so what we're going to talk about first, as I said, is logical functions like the if function. The if function basically allows our formula to sort of think for itself in a very rudimentary, non-like sci-fi scary kind of way. So if you think about, it can kind of use criteria that you give it to do one, to essentially take one path or the other. Before, we've kind of had only one path in our formulas. So, we've said, okay, Excel, go add some stuff, and it adds some stuff and it gives you the answer, right? In this case, depending on the situation, we might add or we might multiply, or we might, we might give an answer, or we might have an error message, or we might show a blank cell. So there are a number of different things you can do here. But basically, the idea is to make it so that your formulas can account for different types of scenarios so that they're more flexible. Let me show you what I mean. Okay, in this example, we've got a little contest that's going on between Jack and Diane. We've got all of our stuff here. We've got cells showing the totals for the year. And then down here, we just have the word winner in red, and then a blank cell next to it, cell C15. If cell C15 isn't selected yet, go ahead and click on that to select it. Okay, so what we want to do, hopefully, is pretty obvious. We've got our points here. What we want to do is declare a winner explicitly on the sheet. Now, of course, if we look at this, we can see who the winner is. But if you had a bunch of people, then you could, then it might be a little more complicated to figure out. And obviously, it's just nice to see someone's name next to the word winner. That's a warm, fuzzy feeling that we might want to give them. So let's write our formula so that we declare our winner here in cell C15. So I've got C15 selected, and now I'm going to come up to the top and click in the formula bar right here. It's blinking, or, I've got my little cursor blinking up there. I'm going to hit the equal sign to tell Excel to expect a formula. And then I'm going to type the word if, just like, what if. So I'll type if. I'll open a set of parentheses. So I'll hold shift. Whoops. I hit enter there accidentally. Okay. I'm going to hold shift while pressing 9 to get a left parenthesis here. And then if you take a look down here underneath the formula bar, we've got our little hint system working again, just like we saw last week. So it says if, and then there's a parenthesis, and then we've got logical test in bold, comma, value if true in square brackets, comma, value if false in square brackets. And then we've got our right parenthesis, because whenever you have the left one, you got to have the right one. What we're going to, so what this is doing, what our hint system is telling us is that we need 3 arguments for the if function. Again, the arguments are just the pieces of information inside those parentheses that tell your function, your little building block, your trick that Excel already knows how to do. They tell your function what information it's going to be working with in order to do its job. So what we're going to do is basically, we're going to give it some information to figure out who the winner is. That'll be our logical test. Then when it figures out who the winner is, that's going to determine whether we use this value if true or value if false. And that'll be the names of our participants, basically. So let's do it. Okay, where it says logical test, what I'm going to do is go B14. You'll notice down here, it's color coded for me up top and down here in the actual cell. So we have B14 is greater than, so the greater than sign, at least on my keyboard, is the same key as the period. You just have to hold shift while you're pressing it. So that's the greater than sign. So B14 is greater than, and then we have C14. And again, that's color coded for me in red this time. All right, so that is my logical test. It's a statement that I'm making to Excel. I'm saying, hey, Excel, B14 is greater than C14. I'm going to put a comma after that because that's the first argument inside my parentheses here. Excuse me. And now we have this value if true in square brackets. The square brackets mean it's optional, but we're going to do all three arguments here. So we have the value of true, and that is going to be, okay. So when Excel is looking at this logical test, this statement here, B14 is greater than C14, what it's going to do is say, okay, is that true or is that false? If it's true, then we want it to do whatever is going to be after this comma, whether it's some form of math or some basic instructions of some other sort. In this case, what we want it to do is display, well, if B14 is greater than C14, in other words, if this number is greater than this number, then we want it to declare Jack the winner. So we want it to display Jack's name in this cell right here as the answer to our formula. So what I'm going to do is open a set of quotation marks. And then inside the quotation marks, I'm going to put Jack. And I'm going to put another quotation mark there to close it out. So you have Jack in quotation marks. Then I'm going to put a comma outside the quotation marks to tell Excel that that is my that's my whole argument for value if true. Now, what this does when we put text inside the quotation marks is it says, treat this as text, as words for humans, rather than as some part of the formula that actually works, you might say. So, it will, so what this will do, in other words, our value if true is going to be just the word Jack, which means the word Jack is going to appear right here in cell C15 if Jack's the winner. Okay, so then I'm going to, so I put my comma outside the quotation marks. And now we've got our third argument, the value if false. So I'm going to put quotation mark, Diane, quotation mark, got it. And then I'm going to close my parentheses. So shift 0 to add a right parenthesis at the end of my formula there. So let's look at our whole formula here. If B14 is greater than C14, the value if true is Jack. The value if false is Diane. I'll click the check mark or press enter on my keyboard. Doesn't matter which, really. And now Diane has been declared the winner. What do you know? And when you look at it, of course, that's true. Diane has 675 as her total versus 634 for Jack. So our formula so far is working. In fact, we could double check it. If I want to, let's say I change that from 92 to 150 or something. Yeah, there we go. Now his is up to 692, and now he's been declared the winner. But there is still a problem with this formula, actually. It doesn't quite work the way one would hope it would. Because, well, take a look. Let's say that I change it so that I think that's right. Yeah. Okay, good. All right. So I changed the 150 to 133. Excuse me. And now we have both folks at 675, but Diane is still being declared the winner. If you look at the formula, you can kind of see why. So if I look up at the formula, I've got B14 is greater than C14 is my statement. If that statement is true, then it puts Jack. If that statement is false, it puts Diane. But this statement is not just true if Diane is not just false if Diane is the winner. It's also false if B14 and C14 are exactly equal to each other, because, well, I mean, if I say, well, B14 is greater than C14, then obviously they're not equal. They're the same. So we need to fix this. We need to add some additional functionality to our formula, so that way it accounts for the possibility of a tie like this. Okay, how would we do that? Well, so what I'm going to do is make sure that the cell is selected again. I'm going to come up here to the top, click in the formula bar, and I'm just going to use my arrow keys to move over a little bit. And I'm going to leave that if at the beginning of, actually, no. I'm going to go ahead and put a bunch of spaces here between the equal sign and the I in if. That's not strictly necessary, but it's going to make it a lot easier for you to see what I'm about to do. So that'll be useful. Okay, so I've got my equal sign there. And then I've got the original part of the formula over here. What I'm going to do is next to that equal sign, I'm going to put if again and open another set of parentheses. You'll notice now the parentheses that go with the original if are now showing as red. So they're color coded as parts of my, as parentheses that are inside a set of parentheses in my formula. And that helps me, again, keep them straight and make sure that I am completing my sets of parentheses. If my formula ends with a red or purple or some other color parenthesis rather than a black one, then I know that there's some set of parentheses that I haven't closed properly. And that can be really useful information to have. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and account for the possibility of a tie. So I'm going to go C14. Or I'm going to go, just to make it the same, I'm going to go B14 equal sign C14. At the beginning of a formula, the equal sign just says, here's a formula. But at the end of, once you've got that initial equal sign out of the way, the equal sign now actually just means is equal to, like it does anywhere else. So B14 is equal to C14. That is my logical test. That's my statement that Excel is going to evaluate for me and see whether it's true or false. I'll put a comma after that. Our value, if true, if B14 is equal to C14, then we know it's a tie. So our value of true is just going to be, in quotation marks, the word tie. Pretty easy. Okay, so I've got just the word tie in quotation marks. Outside the quotation marks, I'm putting another comma there. And then what I can do is just delete the rest of these extra spaces because that was just for readability. And so now our value if false for this if function on the left is actually going to be this whole formula that we originally wrote that to declare the winner. So basically, so let me go ahead and add my parenthesis at the end here. Wonderful. Okay. So I'll hit the check mark and let's see if it's working. All right. So it does say tie there. Perfect. Okay. Let's take this back to being 92 like it was before. Yep. Diane's being declared the winner now. And let's make it 150 this time. And Jack's the winner. Great. Okay. It's working perfectly. So let's look at what our formula now does. What we've got is we do have these two if functions right here. The first one is the one that checks for a tie. So Excel first goes, okay, all right, let's check to see whether B14 and C14 are equal. Okay, we've got 634 here and we've got 675 here. Nope, not equal. If they were equal, then we would stop here. This would be our value if true. So if it checks and they are equal, then it's just going to say tie down here, and Excel is going to ignore this whole portion of the formula. But if B14 and C14 turn out not to be equal, in other words, if this statement is false, then our value if false kicks in, and that's this portion of the formula. And so we go into the other if function, and Excel will then check to see, okay, well, is B14 greater than C14 then? If it is, then Jack's the winner. If it's not, then Diane's the winner. But we have to first check to see whether there's a tie, because if there's a tie, then all of this stuff is useless. But if there's not a tie, then we want to use this to figure out who the winner actually is. So that's the if function. It's pretty handy. I definitely wanted to show you some of that because it can be extremely useful. Let's go ahead and talk about one more really cool thing that the if function can do for us before we move on to our next set or our next big portion of the class here. What I'm going to do, I'm going to come down here to this members sheet down at the bottom. So I'll click on the name of that down there. Excuse me. And now I've got this whole situation right here. I've got some names and some addresses and also some phone numbers. And what I'm doing here in this example, I've got some sort of a group or a club, and I'm keeping track of the contact information of all the people that are part of the group. And I've got some nice formulas here that, strange. Zoom suddenly felt the need to tell me participants can now see your application. That is the idea. I've got some formulas here. If you look at, say, cells A2 and B2, those sorts of things. If you look at these cells with the names and the addresses in them, you'll notice I'm using a formula that kind of puts all these things together into a more sort of printed style. So, for example, here on row 2, I have Mr. in this column, Prior in this column, and Myatt in this column. Over here, I have Mr. Prior Myatt. Rather than typing all that out manually, what I've done is I put this information in these 3 cells, and then I'm using a formula to combine them together. So here comes your $5 computer word for today. Use it to impress your friends and confound your enemies. And that word is concatenate. Concatenate is a fancy computer science term for taking some text and putting it next to some other text. Obviously, it's a little weird that there's a name for that, but in a way, saying taking some text and putting it next to some other text is pretty inefficient. So it makes sense that they might come up with a word for that anyway. So what this is doing, we have the concatenate function up here. Now the concatenate function has actually been replaced in newer versions of Excel. It still works in a newer version of Excel, but generally speaking, you don't need to write that whole thing out anymore. The concatenate function has just been shortened nowadays to concat, like that. But it does the same thing. Excuse me just a moment. Throat's getting a little weird there for a sec. Okay, so anyway, whether you call it concatenate or just concat, it does the same thing. Basically, what it's doing is it's taking these bits of text and it's combining them together. So we have actually, when I click on this in this formula, we actually have 5 arguments inside the concatenate function. And you can tell that because there are 4 commas in there. So the first argument is the cell C2, which is the cell in this case that has Mr. in it. Then there's a comma. So our next argument, where it says text 2 there, our next argument is a period and a space inside of a set of quotation marks. So quotation mark, period, space, quotation mark. So again, that's just telling Excel, okay, the period and the space here, they don't have any special meaning for the formula. They're just text information for humans. And so that, if I just put C2, comma, D2, comma, E2 in this formula, what you get would be Mr. Prime, all one thing, right? Because there's no space in between them. Adding this argument here, the period and then the space, puts a period after Mr. to make it, proper punctuation, and then puts a space after that to separate that from prior, the first name. So then we have another comma, and argument number 3 is D2, prior, the first name, right? Then we have another comma, and the 4th argument is just a space inside of a set of quotation marks. So that tells Excel, hey, drop a space in here. Finally, there's the 4th comma, and then argument number 5 is E2, and that's where the last name is, Myatt. Put it all together, Mr. Prior Myatt. So the concatenate function is pretty useful in and of itself. But we do have a problem here. If you look down a little ways, once we get to row 9, you'll see, well, okay. Also, I should say I should also say in column B here, I have basically the same formula, but a little longer to put the address together on one line. So rather than 5105 Cozy Pony Vale, then Aya, then North Dakota, and then the zip code, we now have 5105 Cozy Pony Vale, semicolon, Aya, comma, North Dakota, 5, whatever. So I'm using a formula again to put that text together in one line. But down here we have our problem. So if you look in cell A9, you'll notice there's a period in there, just kind of hanging out. If you look over in cell B9, there's actually a semicolon and a comma that are just chilling there as well. So what we want to do is, I do want to have the formula here, because if I put somebody else on the list of names, then I want to have the option of having the names having the various names separate, or having them or using them together as one string of text, Or similarly with the address, if I'm going to put, maybe if I copy and paste addresses into one system, I need to put all the street addresses first, and then the cities, and then the states. But in other cases, I might need to combine them together in one piece. So I want the formulas to still be here. What I don't want is these extra stray punctuation marks that are just there for no reason. So I want to write a formula in such a way that if there's nothing here, then there won't be anything here either. But if there is something here, then it will combine the names in the way that I want. We could also do this with addresses, but I'm not gonna do both examples. I'm just gonna show you with the names because that one is shorter, honestly. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to click in. Actually, I'm going to click in cell A2 so that I can fill the new version of the formula all the way down without a problem. So I'm going to click in cell A2, and I've got my formula here with concatenate. I'm going to go to the beginning. I'm going to put some spaces here again between the equal sign and the word concatenate. And then I'm going to click next to the equal sign, and I'm going to start writing the other part of my formula that I need here next to the equal sign. Okay, so I'm going to start with the if function right here. So I'll type the word if, and I'll open a set of parentheses, Shift 9. And then again, I'm being prompted for my logical test, my statement that Excel is going to check to see whether it's true or not. I'm being prompted for my value if true. So if it turns out it is true, what do we do? And then I'm being prompted for my value if false. If it turns out it's false, what do I do? Okay, so our logical test this time is actually going to have another function in it. So I'm also going to type the word or, as in this or that, and open yet another set of parentheses by doing Shift 9 once again. Now my hint system is prompting me for the or function, and it's saying I need logical 1, comma, and then in square brackets because it's optional, logical 2, comma, and so on and so forth. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it actually 3 logical tests to determine whether we've got or whether there's information for the formula to work with or not. In other words, whether there's a name in columns C, D, and E. So my first argument is going to be C2 equal sign, and then quotation mark with nothing in between. When writing a formula, 2 quotation marks right next to each other with nothing in between indicates to Excel a blank cell or an empty place. Technically, in computer science world, we call this a null value. Don't worry about remembering that. Again, there's not going to be a test. Probably no one will ever say the phrase null value to you ever again. But, it's a little trivia for you. Okay, so we have C2 equal sign and then quotation mark, quotation mark. In other words, our first logical test, our first statement that we're making to Excel is cell C2 is blank. Next, so I'll put a comma there. Our next argument is going to be, I know you'll be shocked to see this, D2 equal sign, quotation mark, quotation mark. In other words, D2 is blank. And so, and then we'll put one more comma here. And of course, E2 equal sign, whoops. Quotation, gosh, can't type today. Quotation mark, quotation mark. And then we'll close our parentheses, Shift 0. Okay, so here's our OR function. It gives 3 logical tests, just like we had the one logical test in our previous if functions. C2 is a blank cell, D2 is a blank cell, and E2 is a blank cell. If any of those is true, then it turns out to be, well, okay, let's just move through the rest of the formula and then we'll talk about it. Okay, so after my parenthesis there, closing up the or function, I'm going to put a comma. And now we're being asked for the value if true of our if function over here. So our value of true, in other words, if these are blank cells, our value of true is going to be a blank cell, quotation mark, quotation mark. Then I'm going to put a comma after that. And our value if false is the whole concatenate thing. I'm going to just hit delete a few times to get rid of the extra spaces. And then I'm going to go to the end of my formula and I'll do shift 0 one more time to make sure I close the parentheses that go with the if function, because all of this is inside the if function. Okay, so let's talk about it. Our so we had our if and Excel wants a logical test. Well, we're going to give it 3 using the or function. The first logical test inside the or function is C2 equal sign quotation mark, which means C2 is blank. C2 is not blank, so we're good to go on that. Then it checks to see whether D2 is blank. Then it checks to see whether E2 is blank. If any of those cells is blank, then we use our value if true for the if function, which is 2 quotation marks, in other words, a blank cell. So what it'll do is it'll say, okay, here's the form, I've done the formula and the answer is blank. Or if all of these cells are filled, then we have our concatenate kick in here and we put the last name, the first name, or the title, period, space, first name, space, last name. So when I hit enter or click the check mark, cell C2, or excuse me, cell A2 shouldn't change. We should still have Mr. Prior Myatt right here. But I'm going to come down here and I'm going to double click the little dot in the corner of my selection, just like we did last week. If you recall, double clicking this little dot in the corner there, when you move your mouse over it, your mouse cursor will turn from this kind of a block plus sign into a plus sign that's just made of black lines like this. When I double click on it, it's going to autofill or flash fill all the way down to where there's nothing next to it. In other words, there's no formula in cell or in column B. And so if I click in cell A9, you'll notice now there's no period. There's no extra period in column A there. And you'll notice I have a version of the formula that matches what's in A2. We've got, in this case, rather than C2, D2, and E2, we've got C9, D9, and E9. And same thing down here. I've got C35, D35, and E35. So that tells me Excel is, so if I were to put a name over here, I'll just put me. Then it fills in my full name with a period after the Mr. right over here on the left-hand side. Super duper easy. So that's a really handy thing that Excel or that the if function can do for us. Basically, it allows us to just only run our formula if we actually have some materials to work with, more or less. So that can be really, really handy, because then you don't have to worry about a whole bunch of error messages or weird stuff happening if you want the formula on a row, but you don't have the data for the formula to work with just yet. That should be fine, but this will make everything look a little bit cleaner. There's no stray period in each cell over here in column A anymore. And that makes this sheet look a lot nicer. But it still has the functionality of the messy version. All right, so that's all for logical functions. What questions y'all have about that before we shift gears to the next set of examples? Cool. Well, if you think of something or if you're typing something right now, just let me know and we'll tackle it. By the way, I noticed a few folks came in after I put this in the chat, so I'll go ahead and drop it in there again. Okay, it looks like someone has a question. Just go ahead and type it in the chat, send it my way once you've got it typed up. Feel free. No need to use the hand raise thing. I know why they have that thing, but I don't care for it. But yeah, just type it right in the chat and we will tackle it. But yeah, I noticed a few folks came in after I shared this in the chat, so I'll go ahead and drop it in there again. Here's the link to the example file again. So if you want to follow along, you can head to that. You can head there and download it. All right. Well, while you're typing that question out, I'll go ahead and shift over here. And we'll start talking about data validation. And hopefully by the time you've got that in there, then we'll kind of have oriented ourselves at least on that. So what we're going to talk about next is something called data validation. And basically, normally when you're working in Excel, you could put almost anything into the into your cells. Like, I mean, there are obviously some limits to that, but almost anything you could type in terms of letters or numbers or symbols, stuff like that, you can put into a cell inside of Excel. And so that's and so that gives you a lot of flexibility. You know, you can use Excel for a variety of different things, but it also can lead to problems because sometimes you make a mistake in entering the data, or someone else that you're working with does, and it doesn't, and things don't quite work the way you expect them to, or because things are inconsistent or something wasn't entered in the right format or something like that, it leads to problems with calculations in your formulas or things like that, or just weirdness where you've got, you know, you have, say, a list of orders that are for, you know, that's, you have a list of, you know, 100 different orders. 3 of those orders are for the same customer, but because someone typed the name slightly differently, or, you know, someone made a mistake typing in the customer's account number or something like that, then it looks like, you know, they're all for different customers rather than 3 orders for the same customer. So with things like that, you can use data validation to restrict what kinds of information you can enter in a cell, and that way you don't have to worry about the losing or about problems like that cropping up as much. Obviously, we're still all human and we still all make mistakes, but it makes it harder to make a mistake, which is really what we want, right? So data validation, really, really useful. Let's dive in and talk about it. Okay, so we've got what we've got here is in this example, we've got a few different. We've got essentially a list of customers, and they are, and each of them has, an open customer service case. I used to work these kinds of cases in a previous job. And so we have our list of customers and our and their open cases, and we're trying to keep track of all the cases that have been assigned to us and prioritize and sort things out, so that way we're staying on top of our work. We have 3 columns here that are empty. So we've got a name, account number, and then there's an empty column that says customer type. The three customer types that we're working with are business customers, consumer customers, and government customers. Then we have the case number. We have a category. So what kind of case is it? A purchase case, a repair case, a return case, an inquiry case, or other. And then we have our status, whether we've contacted the customer, whether things are being processed, whether something's shipping, or whether the case is complete. So what we need to do is we need to basically, we want to make it so that it's easy to sort out the various cases that we have. To make that, and keep them consistent with each other. So let's start with our customer type over here on the left. So we've got, what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to come up here and click on C, or click near it, where my mouse pointer turns into this black arrow that points downward. That'll select the entire column C. And I can just apply my data validation to the entire column. That'll make things simpler for me. Now, I don't have to do it this way. Data validation can be applied to a single cell, or it can be applied to a whole sheet, I guess. But applying it to this column makes a lot of sense, because my regardless of how many customers I have on my spreadsheet here, I'll need this information for all of them. And so if I have a lot more, customers, then I don't have to add the validation to extra rows. And if I have fewer customers, then I don't have to go back and delete anything or anything like that. Okay, so here we go. We've selected column C, and now I'm going to come up to the top and I'm going to click on the data tab up here at the top of Excel. When I click on that, of course, it changes my view here so that I can see a bunch of tools that are related specifically to dealing with the information that's stored inside my my sheets here. So there's a bunch of stuff that we don't really have time to get into. Sort and filter is here, as well as on the home tab, like we saw in part 1. But what we're looking for is this data validation. Now, depending on how your screen is laid out and how much space your screen has and so on and so forth, your data validation button might look slightly different from this. You might have an icon, a smaller icon, and then the words data validation written out next to it, that sort of thing. But it just kind of depends on how your screen is arranged. But it should, regardless, look something like this. You should have an icon that's something like this, and you should be able to see the words data validation. If I click on this button, or if I click the words data validation or the little drop down arrow next to it, then I've got my, then I can, if I click the words or the drop down arrow, then I'll see data validation in the menu like this. If I click on the button up here, the little icon itself, then I'll see this here. Either one will get us to the same spot, the data validation dialog box, which is what we want. So it pops up here, and then we have underneath the settings tab there. We're not going to deal with these other two tabs, but it's not anything that you super duper need unless you're working with other people who might get confused by the data validation. Okay, underneath where it says allow here, I've got any value in the drop-down box. I'm gonna click on that. And then I've got a whole bunch of options here. Now we're gonna come back to this in a few minutes and talk about what these options are in a little more detail. But for now, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna click list in the drop-down menu. Change it from any value to list. When I do, I get these two check boxes right here, ignore blank and in cell dropdown. I'm going to leave both of those checked because they're useful. And we'll talk about what that means again in a moment. And then down here where it says source, I could either type in information directly, I could type in the addresses of cells, or I can do what I'm going to do, which is I can click this little up arrow button right here. When I do that, the data validation dialog box is basically going to roll itself up like a little window shade. I'm going to move it off to the side so I can see what's going on there. And then I'm going to come up, and underneath where it says customer type, I'm going to select these three cells, M2, M3, and M4, the cells that say business, consumer, and government. And you'll notice when I select those cells just by clicking in the cell and dragging, over here in my data validation dialog box, in this little blank, I get $M, $2, colon, $M, $4. Now remember, like we talked about last week, the dollar signs make this what's called an absolute reference. And that just means if you were to copy and paste it somewhere else, then all those column letters and row numbers would stay the same. It wouldn't be, it wouldn't change based on where you were copying and pasting the information. And of course, this really just means cell M2 to cell M4. It's just that range of cells, that very small range of cells that we've selected there. I'm going to hit this little, over here on the side, I'm going to hit this little button. It's a down arrow this time next to this blank. And that's going to roll my data validation dialog box right back out. Excuse me. So now I get M2, so now I have M2 to M4 as my source. I'm going to click OK. And now I'm going to, you'll notice there's a little drop down arrow next to where it says customer type. I'm going to leave that alone. Instead, I'm going to click in cell C2 to select just that one. Click in the drop down menu here. And now I have my three customer types that I can just select from a drop down menu. This one is Mr. John Phoenix. I'm going to assume that's just a consumer account. So I'm going to click consumer here. And now I've labeled my my customer type or account type. Again, down here, Miss Aloha Manguia. I'm going to click on that and I'll click consumer. Here's the city of North Frumpton. That's obviously a business or a government customer. So I'm going to click in that cell and click the drop down and click government, and so on and so forth. And I could go through and label all of these. But the point is, if I try to do something else, like let's say I try to type consumer, but I accidentally write consumer and press enter, then Excel gives me an error message. This value doesn't match the data validation restrictions defined for this cell. And I can either click retry to try and type it in again, because if I actually type consumer and spell it correctly, then it's fine. Or I can, if I type something else and I hit cancel, it's going to put the cell back the way it was before I started editing what was there. The reason that this one can stay customer type rather than one of these is because I already had that text in there before I applied the data validation. So as long as I don't try to change this, it'll be fine. But if I try to change it, I have to change it to either consumer, business, or government, spelled correctly and capitalized exactly this way. So the drop-down menu allows me to quickly select it without having to type it in. And the data validation itself ensures that I can't put anything else in there besides those three acceptable values, the three that are on the list, this list from these three cells over here. I could do the same thing with my category and status. In fact, let me go ahead and do the category. We'll skip over status so that we are mindful of our time, but I'll make sure that we have but I do want us to try one more time here. So I'm going to click on E up here at the top, or next to it, wherever my my mouse pointer forms a black arrow pointing downward, so I could select the whole column. Next, and then I'm going to come up here again and click on data validation. Again, if I click the icon, it pops this up right away. If I click the drop down arrow, it's going to give me a menu and I can click data validation in that menu. It takes me to the same place. Okay, underneath the settings tab, I've got allow any value. Again, I'm going to change that to list. Ignore blank. So this is important. Ignore blank means that I can leave these cells blank until they're actually associated with a customer. That way, that way I can leave the data validation on all of these cells without it causing it to look weird. And then in cell dropdown is the little dropdown menu. If you turn that off, the data validation will still work, but you'll have to manually type in the right value or paste it in or whatever, rather than select it from the list. And then for my source, I've got the category. So I'm going to click the up arrow again, come up here, and I'm going to select these 4 cells, L2 through L6. And L6, 5 cells, I guess. And it'll fill in their addresses down here in the dialog box. I hit the down arrow to roll it back out, and I'll click OK again. And now under category, I can click any of these cells and select a category of case that I'm working. So let's talk about the other types of data validation really quickly. We're not going to do examples of them, but I do want you to know what they do. So that way you can know if you need to use one of these other options. So in addition to the list, of course, if you choose any value, that's just turning data validation off. So, so that's, if you want to, if you're like, well, I had data validation here, but I don't need it, or I don't want it anymore, select those same cells, select any value, and then data validation will be turned off for those cells. Also, you could select any one of those cells instead, rather than all of them. And you can check the box that says, apply these changes to all of their cells with the same settings, and then click any value, and that will remove it from all the cells that are set up like that. It's pretty convenient. Okay, you could also do whole number. So that will restrict your cell to only accepting whole number values. No 1.5, no 6 3/4, no irrational numbers or anything like that. Strictly whole numbers or integers, as they say in the math world. So if you want to make sure you don't have, if you want to make sure there aren't any decimal values or weird things like that in your list, then, in this, or in a particular column or in a particular cell, then you can restrict you can use data validation to restrict it to whole numbers only. You could also restrict it to decimals only. You could restrict it to only date values, only time values. You could restrict it to a certain text length. In other words, the number of characters. So, for example, my name, Nathan, has 6 characters. So I could restrict it so that it would only accept values that were longer than, that were 6 characters or longer, or I could restrict it so that it would accept only things that were short, or 6 characters or shorter, or in between somewhere. So, okay, only things between 6 and 21 characters are accepted, or whatever. You can do that with any of these. If you choose whole number, you'll notice you can choose between, not between, equal to, not equal to, greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, and less than or equal to. And then you can either fill in numbers here. So equal sign, if it needs to be a whole number between 1 and 10, then equal sign 1 here, equal sign 10 here. Or you can choose specific cells with the values that you want to keep it between. So that way you can change the cells and change the data validation. So that's kind of cool. There's also a custom option here, which is a little bit complicated to get into, but basically if you use the custom option, then Excel will check the information that you type in based on a formula. If the formula comes back as true, then it's an acceptable value to put in a cell. If the formula comes back as false, then it's not an acceptable value to put in the cell. It's a little weird. If you're like, what? Then don't worry about it too much. But could be useful if your particular situation suits it. I'll hit cancel here. Cool. Okay, so that's data validation. Let's go ahead and move into our duplicates thing here. Well, okay, so here on this sheet, we've got some duplicate entries that we want to weed out. So these are our fake customers with their fake email addresses and their fake mailing addresses and their fake phone numbers and so forth. So what we want to do here is we want to get rid of any duplicate listings that are here. And we could do this in a number of different, well, we could tackle the problem of duplicate listings in a number of different ways. Sometimes you've got, say, for example, a situation where somebody, it's the same email address, but there are two different names on it, or where it seems to be the same person, but their name's spelled two different ways and it's not clear which is which. And so depending on your scenario, you could do this several different ways. But let's go ahead and weed out some duplicates here. What I'm going to do is just click somewhere, select a cell somewhere in this list of options. And then I'm going to come up to the top here and I'm going to click on remove duplicates. Now, if you don't see that, again, you may need to look in maybe smaller than it is on my screen. And you might not be on the data tab up here at the top. If you're not on the data tab, make sure you click data up here, and then hopefully you should see it. You might just see the icon, like it should be these three little bars, blue, white, blue, with an X next to them. Okay, I'm going to click on that remove duplicates option here. And because I had my selection somewhere in this list of customers, it's gone ahead and selected this whole group, this whole group of people, and it's listed out. There's a checkbox here that says my data has headers. If you don't have headings at the very top of your sheet, which we do in the example, but if you didn't in your sheet, then you could uncheck that so that it would check the first row for duplicates as well. Okay. So here's what we do down at the bottom. Under columns here, I have email, title, first name, last name, street address, city, state or province, zip code, country, and phone number. So the nice thing about this is if I had, let's say I have two different listings here. They have a similar name, but I'm not sure whether they're the same person, but they have the same email address listed with them. Well, there can only be one mailbox associated with any email address. So my email address here at the library is nsmith@cals.org. If somebody else named Nathan Smith comes to work here at some point, then they're going to need a different address. So they'll add another letter, like say that person's, middle initial or something like that. But if someone emails N Smith, it could only come to me. It couldn't come to the other person because only I, at least at this point, have the email address nsmith@cals.org. And if somebody else needed that email address, then they would have to give me a different one, or turn off my access to email or something like that and give them access to it instead. You can't have the same person, or you can't have multiple people who are unrelated to each other with the same email address. So the email address is unique. So what I can do is I can come up here and I can just uncheck the boxes. Well, actually, I can click unselect all, and I'll just check the box next to email. that will get rid of anyone on the list who has this, or any entries on the list where the email address is duplicated. So up here at the top, you'll see we have Cyrena Cly at fugiat.org. And then we have the same email address down here. When I hit OK, 20 duplicate values found and removed, 30 unique values remain. There it is again. But even if I, and that would work even if I had people with the exact same name in the list here. So you can choose what criteria Excel is using to judge whether something's a duplicate or not. If you want it to judge based on multiple values, in other words, like several people at the same address, but only when, but they should have different first names or something like that, then you can totally do that. So it's really, really handy to be able to do that, remove duplicates like that. Okay, let's talk about protecting parts of a workbook. So I'm going to click on protecting down here, this protecting sheet, and we're going to take a look here at this. Now, let me check something because I think, okay, I was trying to remember before class, I felt like there was some problem. Okay, yeah, I thought so. Okay. All right, do this for me really quick. Sorry about that. There is a bit of a problem with the workbook. I couldn't remember it beforehand, but now I do. To get this sorted out, what you'll want to do is click this little arrow at the top, and this will be a little quick, fun little thing to know about as well. This little arrow at the top in between the column letters and the row numbers in the corner here. When I click on that, that's going to select the entire sheet. Then I'm going to click with the right mouse button, and I'm going to click on Format Cells here. Where it says Protection, it's got a little square in the box that says Locked. I want to click on that so that it becomes a check mark. And then I'm going to click OK. All right. So that's the way that it should be initially. If you'll notice, so Excel has this thing about, Excel has these features for protecting your work when you are when you're working in your workbook. By default, pretty much every cell in Excel is considered to be locked, but you can make changes to it. It's a little weird, but that's the way it works. And so basically what's going to happen, so what we want to do with this sheet, if you look at this, we've got essentially our same fake customers here. And what we want to do is we want to restrict these these pieces of credit card information so that they can't accidentally be changed. What I'm going to do, I'm going to come up here and I'm going to select columns E, F, or actually, nope. I'm going to select columns A, B, C, and D here. So I'm going to click on the A and drag it over until I get C and D. I'm going to right click inside those cells, and I'm going to click Format Cells. And then I'm going to uncheck the box where it says Locked here, because we do want to be able to change the email address and the name information if the need arises. I'm going to click OK, and that'll get rid of. Okay. It's very irritating. Okay, yeah. Well, let's go ahead and do that example first. Sorry, y'all. This is a weird one. Okay. Actually, there's one easy thing that we can do even before we start to tweak this. If we just want to make sure that we don't change the credit card number by accident, there's a super easy way to do that. What we can do is we can hide those we can hide the cells that have the credit card information in them. So I'm going to come up here to column E, hold down with the mouse button, and I'm going to select F and G so that I get all three of the columns with the credit card information in them selected. Then I'm going to right click at the top here and I'm going to click hide. When I do that, you'll notice now I get A, B, C, D, and then I right here. And then you'll notice there's a tiny little gap right here in between columns D and I. So what this has done, I haven't lost that credit card information, but I've hidden it away so that way I can keep up with it. I can get to it if I need to, but I'm not likely to make changes to it accidentally. And if somebody's watching over my shoulder, they're not going to see that credit card information. By the way, those are fake credit card numbers, so it's not going to help you go on an Amazon shopping spree. You probably figured, but I just thought I'd mention that. So I've got my, I've got that all hidden away. We also have some other hidden stuff here. So if you look at the top of this sheet, you'll notice that column 2 is actually the top column here. Even if I try to scroll up, it's not there. So we actually have a hidden column, or row 2. We actually have a hidden row over here, row 1. If I right click on this little gap between row 2 and the top of the sheet, then I can click unhide. And now I get, there is a secret top row right here. And what I'm going to do so that it doesn't throw us off in the example like it did before, like it did a second ago, I'm going to click on this 1 for the row number, select the whole row, click on the home tab just briefly, and click merge and center. So that way I can unmerge all of those cells. Good, good, good. Okay. Now, I'll come back to the data tab because we'll need it in a second. And then if I wanted to get back to the credit card information, I've got this gap between columns D and I. I'm going to right click in between columns D and I, and I'm going to click unhide again. Hey, I found it, the secret column, column H. And if I continue to, come on now. If I continue to right click here, I can click unhide and I can unhide each column. I could also right click on the name of the sheet and I could click unhide down here in the menu. Oh, that's right. That's for the, it's Monday morning, y'all. All right, let's just go ahead and unhide these other ones. There we go. Okay, cool. We've got our credit card information back. I don't believe we have any other hidden columns or rows in this sheet. Okay, so let's go ahead now and lock down these credit card numbers. Remember I said by default, all of the cells in a sheet are locked, but they are still, you're still able to make changes to them even if they're locked. I'll show you if I click over to the duplicates sheet and right click on it. Y'all don't have to follow me on this bit. I'm just gonna, centered that. I'm just gonna show you. If I right click here and I click on format cells, locked is checked here. I didn't make any changes to that. That's just the default way that a cell is set up. So back on the protecting sheet here, what I'm gonna do is select first columns A through D. So I'll click on A and drag over until I get to column D. Right click in the cells, go to my format cells, and then I'm going to uncheck the box that says locked right here and click OK. Nothing happens, but that's fine. Again, up here at the top, I'm going to click on the column letter for column H, and I'm going to drag over until I get columns H through N. I'll right click again, click on format cells, and I'll uncheck the box that says locked once again and click OK. Great. All right, so now the only cells that are not locked are going to be the cells in columns E, F, and G, and then the cells in column O on off to the right. Everything else in columns A through D and in columns H through N is unlocked. Now, all I need to do is head to my review tab. I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to click Protect Sheet. And then I'm going to, and then I have a whole list of options. It says, allow all users of this worksheet to, and it gives me a whole bunch of possible things that someone using the workbook might want to do with it. Select locked cells and select unlocked cells are checked. That all makes sense. The rest of this, though, I don't really want them to do. I don't want them to be able to format cells, change the look of them. I don't want to be able to have them format columns or rows, add extra columns or rows, put hyperlinks in these cells, et cetera, et cetera. Excuse me. And then I can add a password if I want to. If I type a password in here, what it's going to do is it's going to ask me to confirm the password, just in case I made a typo. And then I'm going to need to keep up with the password. Now, I'm not going to put a password here this time just to make it easier on us. But if you use a password, you have to keep up with it. If you don't keep up with it, what's going to happen is you're going to be locked out of making changes to these cells as well. So it'll keep other people from making unauthorized changes. But even if you're authorized to make changes, it'll also keep you from making those. So make sure that you, if you put a password in, you keep up with it. If you don't, then anybody can unlock it, but they have to know how to do that. So that locks a lot of people out in and of itself, to be honest. So I'm going to click OK. And now, in a way, this entire sheet is protected. But because we unchecked the locked checkbox on most of these cells that actually have data in them, or even the cells down here that could have data in them, then we can still make changes. If I hit delete here, I can clear that out just fine. But if I go over and try to change the credit card information, the cell or chart you're trying to change is on a protected sheet. To make a change, unprotect the sheet. You might be requested to enter a password. So the cells that I kept locked are going to, once the sheet is protected, those are going to be, anyone else who comes along, if they don't have the password, or if they just haven't unlocked the sheet, they're going to be prevented from making changes to those cells. And that can be really, really useful. Other things you can do, if I right click here, you'll notice also I did get unhide here earlier, which I clicked on. I didn't mean to do that, but it gives me this unhide one or more sheets. And then I have reference and hidden sheet. Hidden sheet is what I want. I'm going to click OK. And when I unhide it, then I get some fireworks there. You can hide a whole sheet of data in your workbook. That's just fine. Very, very easy to do. You just right click on it and click hide, and then it hides away. And that way you can make sure that, well, it's really nice for eliminating clutter. If you've got extra data that you need, particularly if it's data that like your formulas refer to or something like that, you can use a hidden sheet to keep that stuff out of the way so that you don't accidentally change it, and so that it just makes it easier to find the information that you actually do need at the time you need it. You can also do, there's an option up here called Protect Workbook. And what it does, it says keeps others from making structural changes to your workbook, such as moving, deleting, or adding sheets. So that allows people, basically it protects the overall setup of the workbook without necessarily getting down into, well, you can't make changes to this particular cell or something like that. If I want to be able to change this credit card information after all, I can click Unprotect Sheet. And then it's done. Because I didn't put a password in there, I could now go in and say, delete this credit card number if I want to. Otherwise, I'd be prompted for the password, and I'd have to get in there and do that. Type it in. All right. So that's pretty much it for data validation, duplicates, and protecting your work. What questions y'all have about that before we move on to our last few bits here? Cool. I don't see anything so far, but if you do have a question, let me know. And it's not too late to circle back if we need to. Speaking of late, though, we're running low on time, so let's go ahead and dive into the last couple of examples here. Okay, what we're going to talk about now is what we call conditional formatting. Now, we talked about formatting a couple of times before. Basically, formatting just means changing the look of text or of your data or of the cell without changing the actual information that's stored there. Conditional formatting is where you create a rule that makes the look of a cell or the data or whatever change depending on what the data actually is. That's really, really useful. So let's go ahead and talk about how to make that happen. Okay, so first thing, so we've got a sheet here that's very similar to what we saw back on the data validation sheet. We've got a list of customers, we've got their case status and the customer type and so forth. And what we want to do with this is we want to make sure that we want to color code it so that we can make sure that we are that we're keeping the highest priority cases high priority. So here's what we're going to do. What we've got is we're going to where is it? Okay. I'm going to come over here and select column I over on the right. That has a little priority number. So we've got our cases are prioritized on a scale of 1 to 10. And basically, we want to try and make it so that it's obvious which cases are the 10s, the highest priorities, and which cases are the ones, the lowest priorities, so that we can make sure we focus on the most important cases here. So I've got the column letter selected. Now what I'm going to do is come over here and click on, or I'm going to click the Home tab up at the top, and then I'm going to click Conditional Formatting, and that's going to give me a big old menu here with a whole bunch of different options. What I'm going to do for this one is I'm going to move my mouse over Color Scales, and then I'm going to choose let's see, this one here, the red, yellow, green color scale, the second one on the list. There's a green, yellow, red color scale, which shows essentially the largest number is green and the lowest numbers red, but I actually want the other way. I want the highest numbers to be red and the lowest numbers to be green so that I can see, like, red alert, these are the high priority cases. So when I do that, you'll notice all the 10s turn red. And then the 9 is a little orangey, and it gets it's orange at 7, and then it starts to get yellow around 5-ish. And then as it gets lower and lower, the 1s are solid green. So that way, at a glance, I can tell, oh, okay, well, these these are my highest priority cases, probably need to focus on these. So the next thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to try to I'm going to try to color code these based on the number of days the case has been open. Now, this is kind of like my example from last week with the various clients, where I had some older cases and some newer cases, or some assignments that were due earlier and some assignments that were due later. In addition to just being able to sort them out, I actually want to show different colors depending on what my depending on how close the due date is or how long the case has been open. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to click on column H right here. And then again, I'm going to move my mouse over conditional formatting, or actually, sorry, I did not explain that well. What I'm going to do this time, you'll notice over here on the right, it says close cases within 5 days. So that's my benchmark. That's what I want to hit. I want to make sure that I haven't had the case longer than 7 days, or I mean 5 days. Some of the cases have been open for longer than 5 days, though, and I want to make sure I'm aware of those so that I don't run over my deadlines, or so that I can catch up as quickly as possible on the things that are most overdue. So, okay, I've got column H selected here. Now I'm going to come up to the top under conditional formatting, and I'm going to move my mouse over, highlight cells rules, and I'm going to click on greater than right here. It says format cells that are greater than, and then it guesses, do you want cells that are greater than 4? Turns out no. What I want instead is I'm going to click on this little arrow right here, roll it up again, and I'm going to click here in cell K2 where the number 5 is hanging out. I'm going to click down here to unroll my dialog box again. So greater than K2, in other words, 5 here, with light red fill with dark red text. In other words, it's going to fill the cell in with light red or pinkish, and then it's going to make the text, the numbers in this case, dark red. I'll click OK. And now you can see anything that says 5 or lower is not formatted. It just looks normal. Anything that's above 5 is going to give me red there. So I know, like, oh, okay, these are some things that I really need to focus on. It's not looking so good there. Okay, so let's go ahead and try another thing here. Okay, so we have our customer types, and I want to be able to look at my sheet and see at a glance which customers are which customers are consumer customers versus which ones are business customers versus which ones are government customers. And I actually wanted to show on a lot more of the row, not just my, not just the cell that has that information, but across more of it. So to do that, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to come down and I'm going to drag my mouse from column letter A all the way over to column letter G here. So that selects all of these cells all at once. Then what I'm going to do is, or actually H as well, because not all of those are going to be color coded. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to the top, click on conditional formatting again. And this time I'm going to select manage rules at the bottom here. And I do have this rule here that's showing up for my column H, but I'm going to kind of ignore that, at least for now. Okay. I'm going to go up to the top and I'm going to click on new rule. And then I have the new formatting rule dialog box right here. In this box, I've got a bunch of different options. Format all cells based on their values, format only cells that contain something, format only top or bottom ranked values, and so on and so forth. The one that I want here, though, is use a formula to determine which cells to format. And what we're going to do is, well, we're going to write just a little formula in here using that if function. I'm going to hit the equal sign to tell Excel to expect the formula. I'm going to type if. I'm going to open a set of parentheses. And then inside the parentheses, I've got $C, whoops, excuse me, $C1, equal sign, and then in quotation marks, consumer, whoops, pressed enter accidentally there. Close those quotation marks, comma, true, comma, false. And then I'll close my parentheses right there. Now, unfortunately, it's not going to color code for me like I would normally want it to in writing a formula over here. That's kind of a bummer, but what can you do? Okay, so let's look just briefly at this formula and what it's accomplishing here. We have our if function. So we need three things. We need the logical test, the value if true, and the value if false. So our logical test is going to be C1, and I did make C an absolute reference because we want Excel to be looking specifically at column C to determine whether an account is consumer type, business type, or government type. So in this case, if C1 is equal to, and then consumer in quotation marks. So in other words, cell C1 has just the word consumer in it. Excuse me. Then if that's true, we're going to get, we're just going to have, then we're just going to give the answer true. If it's false, we're going to give the answer false for this whole formula. What that does, if it comes out and we get true here, if this whole formula comes back with true, then we're going to color code this, or we're going to color code the row that formula is on. Otherwise, if it doesn't come out as true, we're not going to color code it. We're not going to change the formatting because it's false. I'll click on format and I'll click on fill to change the fill color of the cell. And I'll change it to like a light green. Okay. And okay. So now we have our rule here. If C1, so we'll actually skip down to C2. So for each row, Excel is going to look at each of these cells and say, okay, let's look at column C on my particular row that I'm working on. In column C, if on this row it says consumer, then I'm going to turn green. And this one does the same thing. Okay, C column on my row says consumer, I'm going to turn green. C column on my row says consumer, I'm going to turn green, and so on, so that we get a fully green row. Now, we've got this cell value rule right here, the one that turns things red if they're overdue. I'm actually going to click on that. I'm going to hit the up arrow right here to move it up, and I'm going to click stop if true. So that way, if our cells, for these particular cells, if the value is above 5, then it's going to turn red rather than turning green because of this. Because Excel will first check this to make sure, whether it's above 5, whether my case is overdue or not. If it is, then it's going to go, okay, we got to be red, and it's going to stop. Otherwise, it's going to check to see whether this applies. If it's a consumer account, it'll turn it green. I'll click apply, and we can see the results. If you look here, all the ones that say consumer in column C have turned green. Okay, so we are running low on time, but if you look at the handout in the link that I sent earlier, you'll be able to follow along with the government and the government and business examples as well, and do that version of it too. I'll click OK, and I'll move on to one last setup here, a last example for conditional formatting. Okay, so in this example, what I want to do is I've got my same sales data that we worked with last week in the chart example. But what I want to do is I want to make sure that my I want to be able to look at this data at a glance and see when someone's numbers went down from the previous quarter. So in this case, if I look at Egan, he's got 134 in the first quarter of year one. He had 557 in the second quarter of year one. So that's an improvement. But then he dipped a little bit in the third quarter with only 518. So obviously is less than 557. So what I want to do is from here on out, from Q2 of year one onward, I want to turn any of those cells red that show a dip in the numbers from the previous quarter. Okay, so here we go. What I'm going to do is I'm going to select columns C, or I'm going to select, actually I can do the whole thing. I'll select columns C through I here just by dragging over the column letters. Then what I'm going to do is come up here, click on conditional formatting. And then I'm going to click new rule this time. So again, I get this new formatting rule. I'm going to use a formula to determine which cells to format. And I'm going to, do down in the formula area, if, open my parentheses, C1 is less than, whoops, C1 is less than B1. All right, so that'll be our that will be our statement, or that'll be our logical test. C1 is less than B1, and then again we'll go true, or comma true, comma false, and close and close our parentheses there. C1 is less than B1, comma true, comma false. I'll click on format and I'll turn it just red, click OK, and click OK again. So now what I've got is, again, here, 557 in Q2, but we went down to 518 in Q3, so that one's red. Falana started out with 796, but went down to 775, and then went down to 261, and so on. So I can see at a glance what's happening. Now, for each cell, what we're doing there, we've got that, when you look at the formula, for each cell, Excel is changing the formula a little bit. So this version of the formula looks at cell C1 and B1, but the version of the formula that's running in this cell right here, C2, is actually looking at C2 versus B2. If and then down here we've got C3 looking at B3. Over here in cell G5, we've got G5 looking back at F5, and so on. So Excel is changing this formula a little bit for each one, but we're basically writing it as though we're working, or we're basically writing it to deal with the top left cell that the formula, or that the conditional formatting is going to apply to. All right. So I know some folks have to go. I'm sorry that we've run a little bit long today. Next week is going to be pivot tables, pivot charts, and lookup. If you got a little overwhelmed at the end there, honestly, I totally understand. You can always, again, you can always circle back and rewatch in the on the YouTube channel. And I certainly recommend downloading the handout as well, because it explains things in just a little bit different way. So you can get an additional perspective there, and hopefully it will it'll make things clearer. And if you got a little lost this time, we are going to be shifting gears pretty dramatically next time. Next week's session is not really going to build directly on this. It's going to be talking about something different and something pretty cool. So I definitely recommend, that you come back for that last session next week. That's pretty much it. What questions do y'all have for me about anything we talked about today before we wrap it up? All right. I don't really see anything. If you think of a question later, or if you don't have time to type it out right now, feel free to shoot me an email, digital@cals.org. And I hope you have a fantastic rest of your week. And I will see you next Monday morning, 10 a.m. for Microsoft Excel Part 4, our grand finale. Have a great rest of the day. Bye, everybody. Whoops. There we go. Okay. Bye for